they got.
Double Drowning Fatality, tragic death of Mr. K. Mackenzie and his daughter Helen. The sad news of the drowning on Sunday morning of Mr. Ken Mackenzie and his younger daughter Helen came as a great shock to the community. People were fairly stunned by the sad intelligence. Facts were that at about 11 o'clock, Mr. Mackenzie, accompanied by the two girls, Jean and Helen, their cousin, Miss Rothwell, and Miss Anderson, governess, proceeded from the homestead, Bundanon, to the river, immediately opposite the island above the crossing, with the object of giving some of the horses intended for the show swimming exercise.
I, Eleanor Frances Anderson, am a governess and a resident at Bundanon. On Sunday the 29th instant, at about 11 a.m, I accompanied Mr. Mackenzie, his two daughters, Jean and Helen, and Eleanor Rothwell to the Shoalhaven River for the purpose of swimming horses. The deceased, Helen Mackenzie, soaped the ponies and put straps around the two black ponies, as they had no mane. The straps were for Jean and Helen to hold on to. After soaping the ponies, Jean Mackenzie, Eleanor Rothwell, and the deceased, Helen Mackenzie, each rode a pony into the river. The two black ponies swam across towards the opposite bank. When they reached deeper water, the ponies seemed to struggle, and Jean and Helen slipped off into the water.
Mackenzie, am 14 years of age, and am the daughter of the deceased, Kenneth Mackenzie, and reside at Bundanon. On Sunday, the 29th instant, I went with my father and sister Helen and Eleanor Rothwell and Miss Anderson to the river for the purpose of washing some ponies who were getting ready for the show. My sister Helen, Eleanor Rothwell, and myself each rode a pony into the river to wash them. We came back onto the riverbank. My father soaked the ponies, and we each rode back into the river. When I neared the opposite bank, my pony struggled in deep water. I noticed Helen's pony struggling also. We both slipped off our ponies, so I struggled onto the bank. I heard my sister call out. She couldn't swim very well.
Jean and Helen, attired in bathing costume, rode two of the horses into the river. The water at this time was deep, the tide being up. The horses swam for some distance in close proximity to each other, when all at once they plunged and both girls were unseated.
The deceased, Kenneth Mackenzie, was on the bank of the river on the homestead side. When he saw his daughter Helen in difficulties, he pulled off his boots and socks and jumped into the river, and swam to where Helen was. He caught hold of her and held her out of the water. He called out, but both deceased seemed to sink without much struggling.
I saw my father swimming towards her. I saw him catch hold of Helen and hold her above the water. He was coming towards the riverbank, and they both went under the water, but came to the surface again. After struggling for a while, they both disappeared and didn't rise again.
Mr. Mackenzie, seeing his daughter's predicament, jumped in as he stood. He had trousers and shirt on, but no boots. He was a strong swimmer and quickly reached Helen, who was swimming towards him. Jean, in the meantime, struck out for the opposite bank, which was closer, and this, fortunately, she reached in safety. Helen had sunk, but as she rose, she was caught by her father, who held her up and made for the bank. But before he had proceeded far, he was evidently seized by cramp, for he called out to help, and was seen by the horrified spectators to disappear under the water, as also did Helen.
Eleanor Rothwell then galloped to the house for assistance. A man named Oswald McLennan came to the river. I saw him go into the water. I ran some distance to get a boat. I afterwards saw the bodies of Kenneth Mackenzie and Helen Mackenzie on the bank of the river.
Miss Rothwell mounted one of the horses and galloped back to the homestead for assistance. Mr. Oswald McLennan, one of the farm employees, lost no time in riding to the scene of the disaster.
I, Oswald Oscar McClelland, am a farmer and reside at Bundanon. On Sunday morning, the 29th instant, I was lying on my bed when Eleanor Rothwell called help. I ran onto the veranda. Eleanor said, "Mr. Mackenzie and Helen sank in the river." I jumped on her pony. She told me where to go. I reached the river in about 3 minutes.
He dived in. I saw Eleanor Rothwell jump on her pony and gallop towards the house for assistance. Mr. Cleland came into the river on Eleanor's pony. He jumped into the water and swam down where Father and Helen went down. He dived and brought my father's body up first and brought him into the bank, and then went back into the river and recovered the body of my sister. I saw the doctor arrive shortly after.
Jean Mackenzie was on the opposite bank. She pointed out where her father and Helen went down. I swam out and dived down. There would be about 8 or 9 feet of water. The water was fairly clear. I saw the two bodies lying on the bed of the river close together. I was somewhat exhausted and rose to the surface. I dived again and recovered the body of Mr. Mackenzie first, and took it to the bank and laid it on the sand. I went back immediately and dived twice before recovering the body of Helen. The bodies would be about 10 yards from the bank on the side opposite of the homestead.
He dived in and brought out the body of Mr. Mackenzie, and later recovered the body of Helen, both in water about 8 feet deep. McClelland was very much exhausted when he had finished his work of rescue, and it was only by the assistance of Jean Mackenzie, who helped him with a stick, that he was enabled to land with Helen. Efforts were made at resuscitation, but without avail. Doctors Rodway and Molesworth were phoned for and were quick at the scene of the tragedy, but they could only confirm the sad news that both were dead.
On the bank, Jean Mackenzie was the only person present. We turned the bodies on their stomachs and tried to restore animation, but could do no good. I then went and rang up the doctor. He arrived in about half an hour, and I was present when he arrived and examined the bodies. I helped to get them into the boat and to bring them across the river and then on to the house. Just when I got to the river, in the first place, Miss Anderson was away getting the boat and was not present when I brought the bodies from the river. Frederick Arthur Rodway. I'm a legally qualified medical practitioner, practicing and residing at Nowra on Sunday, the 29th instant, at about 11:30 a.m. I received a telephone message that there had been a drowning accident at Mackenzie's at Bundanon. I went immediately to the scene of the accident. I saw two bodies lying on the bank of the river near the water's edge. I recognised them as the bodies of Kenneth Mackenzie and his daughter Helen. Artificial respiration was being resorted to by some persons present. I examined the bodies and I found no external marks of violence. Death had occurred probably an hour previous to my arrival. Death was due to drowning in both cases.
The terrible shock of the sudden tragic double bereavement naturally overwhelmed Mrs. Mackenzie and the other members of the family, as it shocked the whole community when the news passed around. Mr. Mackenzie was in the prime of life, 42 years of age, and Helen was 12 years. The deceased gentleman was known to everyone in the district and was very popular because of his genial personality. He was the second son of the late Mr. Hugh Mackenzie and was born at Bundanon. He was a keen sport, being particularly interested in cricket, in which he excelled in all departments. It was only this season that he gave up active participation in the game. Like his late father, he loved a good horse and kept many. Big-hearted, generous and manly, he will be greatly missed. Little Helen was a bright, winsome child of prepossessing appearance and a lovable disposition. The grief-stricken widow and mother has the profoundest sympathy of the community in her double bereavement and great sorrow, as also have the Mackenzie family generally, who had more than their share of trouble lately. Within the last few years they have lost by death their brother Norman, killed in the war, father, mother, their brother Jack's wife, and now Kenny and his daughter. The sorrow of the bereaved family is deep and harrowing, but the poignancy of their grief will be assuaged somewhat by the knowledge that the hearts of the people of Shoalhaven go out to them at this time of sadness and trouble.
I, Mr. Reuben King, JP, District Coroner, find that the said Kenneth Mackenzie and Helen Munro Mackenzie on the 29th day of January 1922 were accidentally drowned in the Shoalhaven River at Bundanon in the police district of Shoalhaven in the state of New South Wales. The said Helen Munro Mackenzie being drowned while swimming a horse in the river, and the said Kenneth Mackenzie trying to save his daughter.
The funeral took place on Monday afternoon, and though the notice was short, the cortege was one of the longest ever seen in the district. The bodies were brought down from Bundanon by motor launch, the coffins being carried to the two hearses in waiting at the narrow wharf by members of the Agricultural Society's committee, by whom later they were borne from the hearses to the graves for interment side by side and adjoining the graves of the late Mr. and Mrs. H. Mackenzie. The Reverend J.H.G. Old, B.A., Presbyterian, conducted the funeral obsequies, and in an address to the gathering referred to the good qualities of the late Mr. Ken Mackenzie, his activities, his usefulness, his fine attributes as a man and citizen, and his personal popularity. On behalf of the Presbyterian Church, he extended the sympathy of the congregation to the doubly bereaved widow and family, the brothers and sisters and immediate relatives. present, including one from the Committee of the Agricultural Society, one from the Cricket Association, and others from public bodies and private citizens. 8 of the district cricket clubs sent delegates, and people came from far and near to pay their last tribute of respect and esteem to a man of sterling worth in his own person, and a representative of one of the oldest and most highly esteemed of the pioneer families of the Shoalhaven. And in conclusion, the Reverend pointed to the tragedy as evidence of the uncertainty of life, and call it was for all to live so as to be prepared to die and to enter into the life eternal.